Billionaire's double life. She walked away clueless, only to be left in tears when the truth finally hit. My beautiful family. Let's begin with a short story. On a stormy night, a billionaire saw a beggar shivering in the rain. He said, "Wait, I'll bring you a blanket," and left. But at home, he got distracted and fell asleep. By morning, he rushed back, only to find the beggar lifeless, the cold having taken him. The broken promise had cost a life. Lesson 1. Don't trust anyone blindly. It can cost your life. Lesson 2. Never make a promise you can't keep because it hurts deeply. Promise me you will like this video and subscribe to this channel if you are new, because I want to see you in my storytelling family. Don't hurt me, please. Let's begin. The pewter clouds hung low over Chino Hills State Park, their ominous presence a harbinger of the approaching storm. Judy Hendricks stood at the front of the stranded school bus, her slender fingers gripping the worn leather seat as she tried to project calm she didn't feel. At 24, with 3 years of teaching under her belt, she had organized this summer field trip with meticulous care. Now, watching the first heavy droplets spatter against the windshield, she felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden. Through the growing gloom, she could see the worried faces of her students reflected in the bus windows. 28 pairs of eyes looked to her for reassurance, trust evident in their innocent expressions. These were her kids, not by birth, but by the sacred bond of education, and their safety was her paramount concern. The thought of them stranded here, as darkness crept in and storm clouds gathered, made her heart constrict painfully in her chest. Her captivating brown eyes, flecked with gold in certain light, scanned the horizon for what felt like the 100th time. The mountain road stretched empty in both directions, a ribbon of asphalt that seemed to mock their predicament. She checked her phone again, but the no-signal message remained stubbornly unchanged. The bus driver, Mr. Thompson, had disappeared under the hood an hour ago, emerging with grease-stained hands and a grim expression that told her everything she needed to know. "Miss Hendricks?" A small voice pulled her from her thoughts. Lucy Martinez, one of her most sensitive students, stood in the aisle, twisting the hem of her jacket between nervous fingers. "I'm scared of thunderstorms." Judy's heart melted at the tremor in the child's voice. Kneeling down to Lucy's level, she offered a reassuring smile. "You know what my grandmother used to tell me about thunder?" she asked, her voice gentle and steady. "She said it's just the angels bowling in heaven, and every time there's lightning it means someone got a strike." A few nearby students giggled, the sound helping to dispel some of the tension in the air. Judy was about to elaborate on her grandmother's whimsical theory when a flash of movement caught her eye. Through the increasing sheets of rain, 2 pairs of headlights cut through the gathering darkness, a sleek luxury car and a black van approaching from the direction of the park's entrance. The vehicles slowed as they neared the bus, and Judy's breath caught in her throat. The luxury car was a Bentley, its metallic paint gleaming even in the dim light. As it came to a stop alongside them, she could make out the pristine condition of the vehicle. Clearly, whoever owned it took immaculate care of their possessions. The driver's door opened, and a tall figure emerged, seemingly unconcerned about the rain that immediately began to darken his expertly tailored suit. Judy watched, transfixed, as Bulmer Walton stepped into view. Even if she hadn't recognized him from news coverage and business magazines, his presence alone would have commanded attention. He moved with the confident grace of someone accustomed to controlling any room he entered, his broad shoulders straight despite the weather. Stories about Bulmer Walton circulated widely in California's business circles. The billionaire owner of a vast network of gas stations across the state was known for his quick temper and uncompromising business practices. Some called him arrogant, others ruthless. Yet as he approached the bus, Judy saw something in his expression that contradicted his reputation, a genuine concern that softened his strong features. "What's wrong?" His voice carried easily over the growing storm, deep and resonant. When Judy hesitated, caught off guard by his sudden appearance, his tone gentled further. "Don't worry, just tell me." There was something in that moment, perhaps the unexpected kindness in his eyes, or the way he positioned himself to block the rain from reaching the bus door, that made Judy's initial apprehension begin to fade. She found herself explaining their situation: the failed engine, the lack of cell service, the 28 students who needed to get back to safety before the storm worsened. Balmer listened intently, his grey eyes taking in every detail of their predicament. Behind him, two men had emerged from the van, their professional demeanour marking them as part of his staff. The rain had plastered his dark hair to his forehead, but he seemed oblivious to his own discomfort as he assessed the situation. "It's too late to fix the bus now," he declared, his tone brooking no argument. "It's getting dark, and the rain is coming in earnest. You can stay at my farmhouse nearby for the night." The offer caught Judy off guard. Her protective instincts flared, even as she recognized the logic of his suggestion. No, it's fine, thank you," she demurred, though she couldn't offer a viable alternative. Balmer's expression shifted, a flicker of his famous impatience showing through. But rather than anger, his response carried a note of genuine concern. "Don't argue, you can trust us. The kids might get sick in the rain." His eyes met hers directly, and in them she saw not the hardened businessman of reputation, but something warmer, more human. "I have a full staff at the house, and plenty of room. The children's safety should be our first priority." A crack of thunder punctuated his words, causing several students to jump. Lucy's small hand found Judy's, squeezing tight. Looking at the frightened faces of her students, then back at the steady presence of the man before her, Judy made her decision. "Thank you, Mr. Walton. We accept your kind offer." The efficiency with which everything happened next was impressive. Balmer's staff quickly organized the transfer of the children from the bus to the van, which turned out to be equipped with comfortable seating and, much to the kids' delight, a DVD player. Within minutes, they were forming a small convoy, with the Bentley leading the way and a second vehicle bringing up the rear to ensure no one was left behind. As they wound their way through the increasingly stormy evening, Judy caught glimpses of Balmer through the rain-streaked windows. He drove with the same confident precision he seemed to apply to everything, handling the wet roads with expertise. She found herself wondering about the man behind the reputation. What experiences had shaped him? What motivated his unexpected act of kindness tonight? The storm intensified as they drove, lightning illuminating the sky in brilliant flashes that drew both gasps and exclamations of "strike" from her newly enlightened students. Yet despite the weather's fury, Judy felt an inexplicable sense of calm settling over her. Perhaps it was the way Balmer had taken control of the situation without being controlling, or the genuine concern he'd shown for the children's welfare. Little did she know, as their small convoy made its way through the gathering storm, that this chance encounter would be the beginning of a story that would change not only her life, but the lives of countless others. The rain that had stranded them would prove to be not an obstacle, but the first drops of a love story that would challenge everything she thought she knew about judgment, trust, and the capacity of the human heart to surprise. Thunder rolled overhead, nature's own drum roll for the drama about to unfold. In the safety of the van, surrounded by her students' chatter and watching the taillights of Balmer's Bentley guide them through the storm, Judy Hendricks had no way of knowing that she had just met the man who would show her that first impressions, both good and bad, aren't always what they seem. and that sometimes the greatest love stories begin not with a fairy tale meeting, but with a broken-down bus on a stormy mountain road. The narrative of their lives was about to intertwine in ways neither could have predicted, starting with this simple act of kindness in a storm. As they drove through the darkness toward Balmer's farmhouse, the rain continued to fall, washing away the boundaries between their separate worlds and setting the stage for a story of love, misunderstanding, and ultimate redemption that would challenge everything they thought they knew about trust, judgment, and the power of second chances. Chapter 2. Sanctuary in the Storm. As their convoy crested the final hill, Judy's gasp of amazement was echoed by 28 young voices. Through the curtain of rain, Bulmer Walton's farmhouse revealed itself to be nothing short of magnificent. The limestone edifice rose from the misty darkness like something from a dream, its warm lights piercing the storm's gloom with promises of sanctuary. The wrought-iron gates swung open silently at their approach, and the vehicles wound their way up a curved driveway lined with ancient oak trees. Their gnarled branches swayed in the wind, casting dancing shadows in the sweep of the headlights. Lightning flashed, illuminating the full grandeur of the estate in brief, brilliant moments. The manicured gardens, the sweeping terraces, the elegant architecture that spoke of both wealth and taste. "It's like a castle," Lucy whispered, her earlier fear of the storm forgotten in the face of such wonder. The other children pressed their faces against the van's windows, their breath fogging the glass as they tried to take in every detail of their unexpected shelter. Judy found herself equally mesmerized. The term farmhouse had conjured images of rustic charm, perhaps a well-appointed country residence. Instead, they faced a manor that would have looked at home among Europe's finest estates. As the vehicles came to a stop under a covered portico, she noticed that despite its grandeur, there was something welcoming about the place, and warmth that transcended its imposing facade. The efficiency of what happened next left her slightly breathless. Before the rain could touch them, Balmer's staff materialized like a well-orchestrated dance troupe. 10 individuals, each moving with practiced precision, emerged from the house. Some helped the children from the van, while others whisked away wet jackets and shoes, replacing them with warm, fluffy towels that seemed to appear from nowhere. "Welcome to Oak Ridge Manor," Balmer said, appearing at Judy's elbow as she watched the organized chaos unfold. His suit was soaked through, but he seemed utterly unconcerned with his own comfort. Instead, his eyes tracked each child's movement, ensuring none were overlooked in the flurry of activity. A woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, approached them. "Mr. Walton, the East Wing guest rooms are prepared, and Mrs. Leora has hot chocolate and fresh cookies ready in the kitchen." "Thank you, Mrs. Harrison." Balmer's tone held genuine appreciation. "Ms. Hendricks, this is my housekeeper, Margaret Harrison. She'll help get everyone settled." The mention of hot chocolate had already captured the children's attention, their eyes lighting up with anticipation. Mrs. Harrison's warm smile and motherly demeanor instantly put Judy at ease. Here was someone who clearly knew how to handle a house full of excited children. "If you'll follow me," Mrs. Harrison gestured, "we'll get everyone warm and comfortable first. Then there's quite a feast waiting in the kitchen." The interior of Oak Ridge Manor was even more impressive than its exterior. Rich hardwood floors stretched beneath their feet, their surfaces gleaming in the light of crystal chandeliers. Yet despite the obvious luxury, the space felt lived in and welcoming. Fresh flowers brightened every surface, and comfortable furniture invited relaxation rather than mere admiration. The children were led up a sweeping staircase to the East Wing, where a series of connecting rooms awaited them. Each space had been thoughtfully prepared with extra blankets, fresh towels, and even sets of new pajamas in various sizes. Judy's throat tightened with emotion, At the consideration shown in these details, someone had thought about everything these children might need. "The staff quarters are just down the hall," Mrs. Harrison explained to Judy. "I'll be nearby all night if anyone needs anything." She paused, then added with a gentle smile, "Mr. Walton has particular care for children's comfort. It's one of his finest qualities, though not many know about it." Once the children were changed and somewhat settled, though still buzzing with excitement, they were led to the kitchen. The space was vast and warm, dominated by a huge island where Mrs. Leora, the cook, presided over what looked like enough food to feed an army. The aroma of chocolate and freshly baked cookies filled the air, mingling with the comforting sense of soup and warm bread. Judy watched in amazement as her usually rambunctious students were transformed by the gentle guidance of the staff. They sat at the long kitchen table in orderly groups, their wet hair still wrapped in towels, sipping hot chocolate and nibbling cookies, while Mrs. Leora ladled out bowls of homemade chicken soup. It wasn't until all the children were served that Judy realized Balmer had disappeared. She found him in the adjacent sitting room, standing before a massive stone fireplace where flames crackled merrily. He had changed into dry clothes, casual wear that somehow looked just as elegant as his suit, and was studying the fire with an intensity that suggested his mind was far away. "Thank you," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. "What you've done for us tonight. It's extraordinary." He turned, and in the firelight his expression held none of the hardness she'd heard attributed to him in stories and rumors. Instead, there was something almost vulnerable in his eyes. "It's nothing extraordinary about offering shelter to children in a storm," he replied. "Please sit. You must be exhausted." Judy sank into one of the armchairs flanking the fireplace, accepting the cup of tea Mrs. Harrison appeared with as if by magic. The warmth of the fire began to seep into her bones, and with it came a peculiar sense of safety she hadn't expected to feel in this stranger's home. "How many days will you be in the area?" Balmer asked, his voice carefully neutral. The question made her tense slightly, old warnings about stranger danger flickering through her mind. "Why do you want to know?" His response came with a slight smile that transformed his entire face, softening the sharp angles and lighting his eyes with unexpected warmth. "Just curious, don't worry." Something in his tone, a mixture of amusement and understanding at her caution, made her relax again. 7 days, she admitted. "We're here for the children's summer nature program. What about you?" "I planned for 5 days, he said, then added with that same transformative smile, "But I can extend my stay. I love spending time with kids." The statement surprised her, though it shouldn't have given the evidence of his thoughtfulness toward her students. Before she could respond, a peal of children's laughter drifted in from the kitchen, followed by Mrs. Leora's warm chuckle. "They seem to have recovered from their adventure," Balmer observed, his expression softening further at the sound. Judy nodded, finding herself studying him with new eyes. The man before her was a puzzle. The hard-driving businessman known for his quick temper seemed worlds away from this thoughtful host who stocked children's pajamas and employed staff who knew exactly how to make scared kids feel safe. The storm continued to rage outside, but within the walls of Oak Ridge Manor, a different kind of atmosphere was building. As Judy watched Balmer rise to check on the children, noting the gentle way he spoke to each one, and remembered their names, she felt something shift in her perception of him. The barrier between their worlds, teacher and billionaire, ordinary and extraordinary, began to blur, replaced by something more intriguing and indefinable. Little did she know that this night, born of circumstance and storm, would be the first chapter in a story that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, trust, and the true nature of sanctuary. The rain that had driven them to his door would prove to be not just a force of nature, but a catalyst for a journey that would change both their lives forever. As the evening drew on, the children were eventually led to their rooms, tired but happy. The storm's fury had subsided to a gentle patter against the windows, nature's own lullaby. In the quiet that followed, Judy found herself lingering in the sitting room, watching the fires dance and contemplating the strange turns life could take. Balmer returned, after ensuring all the children were settled, carrying 2 fresh cups of tea. The gesture was so unexpectedly domestic from a man of his status that it made something warm flutter in Judy's chest. They sat in comfortable silence, the crackle of the fire and the distant sound of rain creating a cocoon of tranquility around them. "You know," he said finally, his voice thoughtful, "sometimes the worst storms bring us exactly where we need to be." The words hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Looking at him in that moment, backlit by the flames and speaking with such quiet sincerity, Judy felt the first stirrings of something she couldn't quite name, a recognition, perhaps, that life's greatest chapters often begin in the most unexpected ways. Outside, the storm continued its gentle symphony, but within the walls of Oakridge Manor, something new was taking root. In the days to come, this night would be remembered not for its darkness or its fears, but as the beginning of a journey that would teach them both about the true meaning of shelter, trust, and the courage it takes to let someone see beyond the facades we present to the world. As Judy finally bid him good night and made her way to her room, she carried with her the image of Balmer Walton, not as the world knew him, but as she had discovered him to be, a man of surprising depth and kindness, whose imposing home had become, for one stormy night, a sanctuary of unexpected possibilities. Chapter 3. Days of Discovery. Dawn broke over Oakridge Manor with a crystalline brilliance that made the previous night's storm seem like a distant dream. The morning sun painted the grounds in hues of gold and emerald, droplets of rain still clinging to leaves and petals like scattered diamonds. As Judy stepped onto the manor's expansive terrace, she found Balmer already awake, surveying the rejuvenated landscape with quiet contentment. "The children are still sleeping," she said softly, accepting the steaming cup of coffee he offered without comment, as if this morning ritual was already familiar between them. They were exhausted from last night's adventure. Balmer's response was interrupted by the sound of excited voices. Looking down at the garden below, they watched as a group of groundskeepers began setting up what appeared to be an outdoor obstacle course. "I thought your students might enjoy some structured activities while they're here," he explained, a hint of uncertainty in his voice. "I hope you don't mind." The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched something deep within Judy. This man, known throughout California for his shrewd business dealings and fierce temperament, had spent his night not just providing shelter, but planning activities for 28 stranded school children. That first morning set the tone for what would become 7 extraordinary days. The obstacle course proved to be just the beginning of Balmer's surprises. As the children gathered for breakfast, still in their gifted pajamas, he unveiled a schedule that would have put professional event planners to shame. "Today," he announced, his usual commanding presence softened by genuine enthusiasm, "we're going to learn about wilderness survival. I've arranged for park rangers to teach us about local wildlife, plant identification, and basic navigation skills." The children's excitement was contagious, their earlier trepidation about being stranded completely forgotten. Judy watched in amazement as Balmer seamlessly transformed from intimidating billionaire to engaged participant in their adventures. He knelt in the dirt to help identify animal tracks, his expensive clothes forgotten as he demonstrated how to tell direction using the sun and natural markers. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Walton," Judy remarked as they watched the children practice building safe campfires under the ranger's supervision. His response was thoughtful, his eyes fixed on the scene before them. Most people only see what they expect to see. The hard businessman, the quick temper, the arrogance. He turned to meet her gaze. Sometimes it's easier to let them believe what they want. The second day brought new revelations. Balmer had arranged for local naturalists to lead a butterfly tagging expedition. The sight of him, this powerful man who commanded a vast business empire, gently helping Lucy cup her hands around a delicate monarch butterfly, touched something in Judy's heart that she hadn't known was waiting to be awakened. "Gentle," he instructed, his voice soft as he guided Lucy's small hands. "Sometimes the most precious things in life require the lightest touch." His eyes met Judy's over the child's head, and the moment held something more than just a lesson about butterflies. Each day brought new discoveries, not just for the children but for Judy as well. She watched as Balmer's reputation for impatience was contradicted again and again by his actions. During the third day's astronomy lesson, he spent hours helping Tommy, who struggled with numbers, learn to locate constellations. His patience never wavered, his encouragement never flagged. The fourth day found them deep in scout activities, with Balmer fully participating in everything from knot tying to first aid training. His laughter, genuine and unreserved, echoed through the hills as he joined in the children's games. It was during a quiet moment, while the kids practiced their newly learned skills, that he shared something unexpected with Judy. "I never had this as a child," he admitted, his voice carrying a weight she was beginning to recognize as carefully controlled emotion. These simple joys, these moments of discovery, they're precious beyond any business deal I've ever made. The fifth day brought rain again, but unlike the storm that had first brought them together, this was a gentle summer shower that transformed the manor's grounds into a mystical landscape. Balmer turned what could have been a day of disappointed indoor confinement into a magical experience, organizing an indoor treasure hunt that incorporated lessons about art, history, and science. "Each piece in this house has a story," he explained, as the children discovered clues hidden near priceless artifacts and works of art. "Just like each person we meet has a story, if we take the time to look beyond the surface." The sixth day dawned clear and bright, perfect for the nature photography workshop Balmer had arranged. Professional photographers taught the children about composition and lighting, but it was Balmer's obvious joy in their discoveries that made the day memorable. He moved among them with an ease that seemed to grow with each passing hour, his natural authority tempered by genuine warmth. "You see that?" he asked Judy quietly, showing her a photo one of the students had taken, a simple wildflower caught in a shaft of sunlight. "Sometimes the most beautiful things are the ones we might have walked right past, without noticing." The seventh day arrived too quickly, bringing with it a bittersweet awareness that their unexpected adventure was coming to an end. Balmer had saved the best for last, a celebration that combined everything they had learned throughout the week. The children put on skits about their experiences, shared their photographs, and demonstrated their new skills to an audience of staff members who had become like family. As evening approached on that final day, Judy found herself standing with Balmer on the same terrace where they had watched the sunrise a week ago. The air was heavy with unspoken words and the weight of impending farewell. "I need your phone number," he said suddenly, his voice carrying an urgency she hadn't heard before, "for practical reasons, in case any of the children want to visit again." The request caught her off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because she had been hoping for it. Their eyes met, and in that moment, something shifted between them. A recognition that these 7 days had been more than just an unexpected interruption in their lives. As they exchanged numbers, their fingers brushed briefly, sending a current of awareness through both of them. The connection that had been building over the past week crystallized into something tangible, something that couldn't be ignored. "This doesn't have to be goodbye," Balmer said softly, his usual confidence giving way to a vulnerability that made Judy's heart race. What happened here these days? They meant something, didn't they? Looking up at him, Judy saw not the billionaire businessman the world knew, but the man she had discovered over these 7 extraordinary days, the man who remembered every child's name, who found joy in simple discoveries, who had shown her that first impressions don't always tell the whole story. "Yes," she replied, her voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. They meant everything. As the sun set on their 7th day together, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, neither Balmer nor Judy could have known that this was just the beginning of their story. The days of discovery had planted seeds that would grow into something beautiful and unexpected, but like all precious things, it would face its own storms before reaching full bloom. The bus that had brought them together, now repaired and waiting in the driveway, would take them away tomorrow. But as they stood there in the fading light, watching the children chase fireflies on the lawn below, both knew that something profound had changed. They had discovered not just each other, but versions of themselves they hadn't known existed, versions that would continue to surprise and challenge each other in the days to come. Their story, born in a storm and nurtured through 7 days of shared discovery, was about to enter a new chapter. The world beyond Oak Ridge Manor awaited them, with all its complications and expectations, but the foundation they had built in these precious days would prove to be stronger than either of them could have imagined. Chapter 4. Growing Hearts. The weeks following their parting at Oak Ridge Manor unfolded like pages from a story neither Balmer nor Judy had expected to be part of. Their first phone call came 3 days after the children had returned home, ostensibly to discuss thank you cards the students had made. The conversation, meant to be brief, stretched into hours as they found themselves sharing thoughts that went far beyond simple gratitude. "The house feels different now," Balmer admitted, his voice carrying a warmth that made the phone line seem inadequate. "Quieter. I find myself missing the sound of children's laughter in the halls." Judy, curled up on her modest apartment's window seat, felt her heart flutter at the vulnerability in his tone. "The children miss you too. Lucy asked today if we could have another storm so we could visit again." Their laughter mingled through the connection, and in that moment, the distance between their worlds seemed to shrink just a little more. That call led to another, and another, each conversation revealing new layers to their connection. Their first planned meeting came a week later, at a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of San Francisco. Judy arrived early, her hands fidgeting with her cup of tea as she watched the door. When Balmer walked in, the usual power and presence he carried seemed tempered by something softer, more personal. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said as he sat down, his admission surprising them both. She studied him, noting how different he looked in this intimate setting compared to his public persona. "Why wouldn't I?" "Our worlds are very different," he replied, his fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth. "Sometimes fairy tales end when everyone returns to their own castles." "Is that what you think this is? A fairy tale?" His eyes met hers, and the intensity she found there made her breath catch. "No," he said softly. "This feels far more real than any fairy tale I've ever heard." That afternoon marked the beginning of a courtship that defied expectations, both their own and those of the world around them. Balmer, known for his rigid schedule and business focus, began finding reasons to attend school functions where Judy taught. He would arrive without fanfare, sitting quietly in the back during performances, his presence noted only by the occasional whisper, and the warm smile that lit Judy's face when she spotted him. Their meetings grew more frequent, each one revealing new facets of their connection. During a weekend visit to the California Academy of Sciences, Bulmer showed a childlike enthusiasm for the exhibits that matched that of Judy's students. His extensive knowledge of marine biology, shared as they watched jellyfish pulse hypnotically in their tanks, surprised and delighted her. "How does someone who runs gas stations know so much about sea creatures?" she asked, genuinely curious. His smile held a hint of sadness. "When you grow up with nothing, you learn that knowledge is the one thing nobody can take away from you. I read everything I could get my hands on, still do." Moments like these, when the carefully constructed walls around his past lowered just slightly, made Judy's heart ache with tenderness. She began to understand that his reputation for quick temper often masked a deep sensitivity he'd learned to protect. Their relationship deepened through shared experiences that bridged their different worlds. Bulmer introduced her to the finer points of wine tasting at exclusive vineyards, while she showed him the joy of grading papers in a cozy coffee shop on Sunday afternoons. He attended parent-teacher conferences at her school, not as a billionaire businessman, but as someone who genuinely cared about education and children's welfare. One memorable evening, they found themselves caught in another rainstorm, this one during a walk through Golden Gate Park. Instead of rushing for shelter, Bulmer took her hand and led her in an impromptu dance on the wet grass, their laughter rising above the patter of raindrops. "You've changed me," he confessed as they swayed together, water streaming down their faces. "I used to think success was measured in dollar signs and business deals. Now I know it's measured in moments like this." Their love grew like a rare flower, nurtured by understanding and trust. Bulmer's staff at Oak Ridge Manor, who had witnessed their beginning, noticed the changes in him. The sharp edges of his personality softened, his legendary temper appeared less frequently, and genuine smiles became a common occurrence rather than a rarity. Mrs. Harrison, who had known him longer than most, commented one evening as she brought tea to his study, "You remind me of a locked room that's finally found its key, sir." The analogy stayed with him, and 6 months into their relationship, during a quiet dinner at home, he shared it with Judy. "Before you, I was that locked room," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I had everything and nothing at the same time. You showed me what I was missing." Their love story became the subject of subtle speculation in business circles and local media, but they protected their privacy fiercely. Bulmer, who had never cared much for public opinion, found himself wanting to shelter this precious thing they had built together from the harsh glare of publicity. When they celebrated their 1-year anniversary, it was back at Oak Ridge Manor, in the same sitting room where they had first truly talked. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting warm light over their faces as they remembered that stormy night that had brought them together. "Do you believe in fate?" Bulmer asked suddenly, his hand reaching for something in his pocket. Judy watched him, her heart beginning to race as she recognized the significance of the moment. "I believe in the beauty of unexpected storms," she replied softly. He moved from his chair to kneel before her, producing a small velvet box. The ring inside was stunning but not ostentatious. He had learned enough about her to know she would prefer elegance to extravagance. "I've built an empire of gas stations across California," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I've made billions of dollars and closed countless deals. But nothing I've ever achieved comes close to the miracle of finding you. You've taught me that true wealth isn't in bank accounts or business holdings, it's in the ability to love and be loved in return." Tears sparkled in Judy's eyes as he continued, "You saw past my reputation, past my walls, to the person I could be. You've made me not just successful, but truly rich in all the ways that matter. Will you marry me? The word yes had barely left her lips before they were in each other's arms, the ring forgotten for a moment as they held each other close. When he finally slipped it onto her finger, the diamond caught the firelight and scattered it like stars across the room. Their engagement made headlines in the business sections of newspapers, but neither paid much attention to the coverage. They were too busy planning their future, discussing dreams that went far beyond wedding details. Ballmer spoke of establishing educational foundations, of using his wealth to create opportunities for children who, like him, came from nothing. Judy's passion for teaching found new inspiration in his vision, and together they began to imagine ways to make a difference in the lives of others. As spring turned to summer, their love continued to grow and deepen. The grounds of Oak Ridge Manor, where their story had begun, became a favorite retreat for weekend picnics and quiet evenings together. They would often sit on the terrace where they had shared their first morning coffee, planning their future while watching the sun paint the sky in brilliant colors. Neither of them could have known that their happiness was about to face its greatest test. Like the storm that had first brought them together, another kind of tempest was brewing, one that would challenge everything they thought they knew about trust, love, and the power of perception. But for now, in these precious days of their engagement, their love seemed as solid as the manor's ancient foundations. They had built something beautiful together, a connection that transcended their different backgrounds and defied society's expectations. Their hearts had grown together, creating a love story that proved that sometimes the most unexpected meetings can lead to the most extraordinary journeys. Chapter 5. Shadows of Doubt. The Moonlight Garden restaurant shimmered like a jewel in the heart of San Francisco's financial district, its Art Deco facade catching the last rays of the setting sun. Judy sat at a corner table with her friend Penelope Morrison, celebrating the latter's promotion at the law firm where she worked. The engagement ring on Judy's finger caught the light as she lifted her water glass, sending prismatic reflections dancing across the crisp white tablecloth. "I still can't believe you're marrying Ballmer Walton," Penelope mused, her eyes tracking a waiter carrying plates of exquisitely prepared cuisine to nearby diners. "It's like something out of a movie, The Billionaire and the Schoolteacher." Judy smiled, touching her ring with unconscious tenderness. "He's so different from what people think. You should see him with my students when he visits the school. Last week he spent an hour helping Tommy with his science project." The conversation drifted to wedding plans and Penelope's new position, but something in the restaurant's atmosphere shifted subtly. A ripple of whispers and quiet gasps moved through the dining room like a gentle wave. Judy noticed several patrons glancing toward the entrance, their expressions a mixture of recognition and curiosity. Her heart lifted automatically, assuming Ballmer had decided to surprise her. He did that sometimes, appearing unexpectedly at places where he knew she would be, his eyes holding that special warmth reserved only for her. But when she turned to look, the scene before her sent ice crystallizing through her veins. Ballmer was indeed walking into the restaurant, but he wasn't alone. A striking woman with elegant poise accompanied him, her hand resting comfortably on his arm. Behind them came 4 children, dressed impeccably, their behavior suggesting familiarity with both adults. They moved like a unit, like a family who had done this countless times before. The woman said something that made Ballmer laugh. That rich, genuine laugh Judy had thought was reserved for their private moments. One of the children, a girl about 12, tugged at his sleeve and received an affectionate pat in response. They were led to a table across the restaurant, partially obscured by a decorative screen, but still visible from where Judy sat frozen in her chair. "Oh my God!" Penelope's voice cut through the roaring in Judy's ears. "Look at him. He's with someone else." Her words dripped with a mixture of shock and vindication. "I've heard rumors, but I never— Judy, I think he's been married all along." "No," Judy whispered, but her protest sounded weak even to her own ears. "There must be an explanation." "Wake up, honey," Penelope leaned forward, her voice urgent and fierce with protective anger. "You've been betrayed. Men like him, they're used to having everything they want. Why should that stop at one family?" Judy watched, unable to look away, as Bulmer pulled out a chair for the woman with practiced ease. The children settled around them, everyone talking and laughing with the comfortable familiarity of long association. It was a scene of domestic happiness that stabbed at her heart with every passing second. "The signs were always there," Penelope continued, her words finding purchase in the cracks suddenly appearing in Judy's certainty. "The business trips, the unexpected cancellations, the way he guards his privacy so carefully. You told me yourself he never talks about his past." Memories began to resurface, taking on darker meanings in the shadow of this new reality. The private wing of Oak Ridge Manor she'd never been invited to explore. The phone calls he would step away to take, the mysterious appointments that would occasionally force him to reschedule their plans. "I thought—" Judy's voice cracked as she watched one of the boys whisper something to Bulmer, who responded with that special smile she'd believed belonged only to their relationship. "I thought he was different." The elegant ring on her finger, which had felt like a promise of forever just moments ago, now seemed to burn with accusation. How many other women had worn rings from him? How many others had believed they were special, unique, the one who had finally seen past his public persona to the real man beneath? "Leave now," Penelope urged, reaching across the table to grasp Judy's trembling hands. "Leave before he sees you. You don't need this public humiliation on top of everything else." But Judy couldn't move. She remained transfixed by the scene playing out before her, this alternate version of the man she loved, this life she had known nothing about. The woman touched Bulmer's arm again, and he turned to her with such natural intimacy that Judy felt physical pain in her chest. A waiter approached their table, concerned by her obvious distress, but Penelope waved him away. "Judy," she said firmly, "you need to listen to me. Men like Bulmer Walton live in a different world. They think normal rules don't apply to them. You're young, beautiful, and he probably convinced himself it wasn't really wrong to pursue you. But look at them. That's his real life over there. You're just an indulgence." Each word hit like a physical blow, but they crystallized something in Judy's mind. The perfect fairy tale of the past year shattered, revealing sharp edges that cut deep into her soul. Every moment they had shared, every tender word and loving gesture suddenly felt tainted by deception. "I can't—" She started to rise, her movements jerky and uncoordinated. "I need to—" "Go," Penelope finished for her, already signaling for the check. "Go home. I'll take care of everything here." Judy's exit from the restaurant passed in a blur. She was vaguely aware of concerned looks from other diners, of Penelope's protective presence guiding her through the door, of the cool evening air hitting her face like a slap. Her feet carried her automatically toward her car, while her mind replayed the scene she had witnessed in an endless, torturous loop. The drive home was dangerous. Tears kept blurring her vision, and several times she had to pull over to catch her breath. The engagement ring caught the streetlights as she gripped the steering wheel, each flash a reminder of what she had believed to be real. Her apartment, when she finally reached it, felt like a museum of lies. Every surface held memories of Bulmer, photos of their times together, small gifts he had given her, books they had discussed. Even the coffee mug in her sink was one he had used that morning, his lipstick-free coffee ring still visible on the rim. Sitting at her small writing desk, Judy stared at the blank paper before her. Words began to flow, carried on waves of pain and betrayal. The letter took shape through her tears, each sentence a dagger aimed at the heart of their relationship. "Bulmer, I thought you loved me, but today I saw the truth. You've betrayed me. Don't try to find me or call me. If you do, I'll end my life. Goodbye forever." The threat of suicide flowed from her pen before she could consider its implications. a measure of the depth of her pain rather than a real intention. She sealed the letter with hands that had stopped trembling, replaced by a terrible certainty. Tomorrow she would have it delivered to his office. Tomorrow she would begin the process of excising him from her life like the tumor he had proven to be. But tonight, in the privacy of her apartment, Judy Hendricks allowed herself to mourn the death of what she had believed to be perfect love. Outside her window, the city continued its nighttime rhythm, unaware that within its midst a heart was breaking into irreparable pieces. The engagement ring lay on her desk beside the sealed letter, its diamond no longer catching light but seeming to absorb shadows instead. In the Moonlight Garden restaurant, Balmer remained unaware of the tragedy that had unfolded mere tables away. He continued his dinner, laughing with the children, completely oblivious to the fact that his happiness was about to be shattered by a misunderstanding that would test the very foundations of love and trust he had built with Judy. The truth about his dinner companions, a truth that could have prevented the impending catastrophe, remained unspoken, waiting to be revealed only after hearts had been broken and lives had been changed forever. In the growing darkness of her apartment, Judy curled into herself, unaware that she was about to set in motion a chain of events that would either destroy or strengthen the greatest love she had ever known. Chapter 6. Words of Pain. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Balmer Walton's executive office, casting long shadows across the polished mahogany desk where he sat reviewing quarterly reports. The panoramic view of San Francisco's skyline stretched before him, a testament to the empire he had built from nothing. Yet today, something felt off-kilter in his usually ordered world, an inexplicable heaviness that had followed him from sleep. The intercom buzzed, his assistant's voice carrying a note of uncertainty he rarely heard. "Mr. Walton, there's a messenger here with a personal delivery. He insists it must be handed directly to you." Balmer's first instinct was to refuse. He had built his success partly on strict protocols about unsolicited deliveries. But that same inexplicable feeling made him pause. Send him in. The messenger was young, barely out of his teens, clutching a simple white envelope with the careful attention usually reserved for priceless artifacts. As he placed it on Balmer's desk, the boy's eyes darted nervously between the envelope and its intended recipient, as if he could sense the weight of its contents. Something about the handwriting on the envelope made Balmer's heart stutter. He knew that elegant script, had seen it on countless notes left on his pillow, in margins of books they had shared, on cards celebrating their moments together. Judy's handwriting had always struck him as a reflection of her soul, beautiful, graceful, and utterly genuine. The messenger disappeared, leaving Balmer alone with an envelope that suddenly seemed to possess its own gravity. His hands, which had negotiated billion-dollar deals without trembling, shook slightly as he broke the seal. The letter inside was brief, but each word carried the force of a physical blow. "Balmer, I thought you loved me, but today I saw the truth. You've betrayed me. Don't try to find me or call me. If you do, I'll end my life. Goodbye forever. Judy." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Balmer read the words again and again, each time hoping they would somehow rearrange themselves into something that made sense. The paper crinkled in his tightening grip, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence of his office. His first instinct was to reach for his phone, to call her and demand an explanation. But the threat in her words, "I'll end my life," stayed his hand. He had seen enough tragedy in his life to know that some threats couldn't be tested. The board meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock came and went. His assistant rescheduled it without being asked, one look at his face telling her all she needed to know. For hours, Balmer sat motionless behind his desk, the letter before him like a bomb that had already detonated, leaving his world in pieces. What truth had she seen? The question circled his mind like a predator. Yesterday had been ordinary, a day filled with meetings, plans for their future, and dinner with understanding dawned with the force of a thunderbolt. The dinner at Moonlight Garden with Catherine and the children from the newest orphanage. Had Judy seen them? Had she misinterpreted that simple meeting as something sinister? The irony was almost too much to bear. The very thing that had first drawn them together, his love for children and his secret work with orphanages, had now become the wedge driving them apart. He wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but the sound that escaped his throat was closer to a sob. The woman who had seen past his carefully constructed walls, who had understood him better than anyone ever had now drawn the worst possible conclusion from a glimpse of his other life. Mrs. Harrison's voice echoed in his memory. The truth, shared too late, becomes indistinguishable from a lie. He had been meaning to tell Judy everything, about his past, about the orphanages, about the network of care he had built across California. He had been waiting for the right moment, wanting to share that part of himself in a way that would make her understand why he had kept it private for so long. Now that hesitation had cost him everything. The sun had begun its descent when Balmer finally moved from his chair. The city below had transformed, office lights flickering on like earthbound stars. He stood at the window, his reflection overlaid on the darkening sky, and saw what others had always seen. A powerful man, a successful businessman, someone who appeared to have everything except the one thing that truly mattered. His phone lay silent on the desk, screaming with the absence of her usual evening call. The habit of reaching for it, of hearing her voice share the small details of her day, had become as natural as breathing. Now each breath felt like a struggle against the void her words had created. The letter had crystallized into an artifact of pain on his desk, its edges sharp enough to cut through the armor he had spent decades building. The threat within it bound his hands, preventing the simple action of picking up the phone and explaining everything. His assistant entered quietly, placing a cup of tea on his desk, a gesture she had seen Judy do countless times when visiting the office. The familiar aroma only served to deepen the ache in his chest. "Sir," she said softly, "the children at the 3rd Street home are expecting you for their evening reading session." For a moment Balmer considered cancelling. The thought of facing innocent questions about where Ms. Hendricks was, of maintaining a facade of normalcy while his world crumbled, seemed impossible. But then he remembered why he had started these evening sessions in the first place, because every child deserved to know they mattered to someone. "Have the car brought around," he said, his voice steady despite the turmoil within. "And Clara, thank you." The drive to the orphanage passed in a blur of city lights and internal darkness. The letter sat in his breast pocket, its weight insignificant in physical terms, but crushing in its emotional gravity. Each streetlight they passed illuminated a different memory. Judy's laugh during their first morning at Oak Ridge Manor, her face lit with joy as she accepted his proposal, the way she looked at him as if seeing something no one else had ever noticed. At the orphanage, he read to the children as he always did, his voice never betraying the pain that threatened to overwhelm him. When one of the younger girls crawled into his lap, seeking comfort after a nightmare, he held her close and wondered how something so pure as his love for these abandoned children could have become the instrument of his own heartbreak. Later that night, in his study at Oak Ridge Manor, Balmer poured himself a drink he didn't touch. The letter lay before him, its words unchanging despite hours of scrutiny. Outside, a storm was brewing, not unlike the one that had first brought Judy into his life. The irony wasn't lost on him, how a storm had given him the greatest gift of his life, and now another threatened to wash it all away. Thunder rolled across the hills, and somewhere in the city, Judy was alone with her pain, believing the worst of him. His hand reached for the phone again, muscle memory fighting against the warning in her letter. The threat of suicide hung between them like an invisible wall, forcing him to respect her demand for silence, even as every fibre of his being screamed to explain, to make her understand. The night stretched endlessly before him, each minute an exercise in restraint, each hour a lesson in the cost of secrets kept too long. Tomorrow he would have to face the world as Bulmer Walton, the billionaire businessman. But tonight, in the solitude of his study, he allowed himself to be simply a man whose heart had been shattered by words on paper. The storm raged on, its fury matching the tempest in his soul. In its thunder, he heard echoes of all the words he should have said sooner. In its lightning, he saw flashes of a future that had seemed so certain just yesterday. And in the darkness between, he faced the possibility that sometimes love, no matter how real or deep, could be destroyed by the very secrets kept to protect it. Chapter 7. Silence and Separation. 6 months can feel like an eternity when measured in heartbeats of longing. For Bulmer Walton and Judy Hendricks, each day of their separation stretched like an endless desert, barren of the joy they had once shared. The seasons changed, summer fading into autumn, then winter, but the pain remained as fresh as the morning Judy's letter had shattered their world. Oakridge Manor, once alive with warmth and possibility, became a mausoleum of memories. Bulmer walked its halls like a ghost, past rooms that still echoed with phantom laughter and conversations never finished. The terrace where they had shared their first morning coffee remained untouched, 2 chairs forever waiting for a reunion that seemed impossible. Mrs. Harrison watched her employer with growing concern. The man who had emerged from his difficult past through sheer force of will now seemed to be fading before her eyes. His legendary temper, which Judy's presence had softened, returned with a vengeance. Business associates learned to fear the cold fury that could erupt without warning, never knowing it was merely a fraction of the pain he carried inside. "Sir?" Mrs. Harrison ventured one evening, finding him in his study staring at an untouched glass of whiskey. "Perhaps if you explained—" "She threatened to end her life if I contacted her." Bulmer cut her off, his voice raw with suppressed emotion. "I won't risk that. I can't." The threat in Judy's letter became his prison, each day of silence, another bar in the cage of his own making. He threw himself into his work with almost manic intensity, expanding his business empire as if trying to fill the void she had left. Board meetings that once ended at reasonable hours now stretched late into the night, his demands for perfection driving his executives to exhaustion. Only the children at his orphanages saw glimpses of the man he had been. During his visits, which became more frequent, as if seeking salvation in their innocent acceptance, he would read stories and play games with a desperate sort of energy. The younger ones didn't understand why Ms. Hendricks never visited anymore, but they learned not to ask after seeing the shadow that crossed their benefactor's face at the mention of her name. Across the city, Judy lived her own version of hell. Her classroom, once a place of joy and creativity, became a refuge of routine. She moved through her days like an automaton, teaching lessons and grading papers with mechanical precision. Her students noticed the change. The sparkle had gone from her eyes, her laugh had become rare and forced. "Miss Hendricks doesn't smile anymore," Lucy confided to her mother one evening. "Not like she used to when Mr. Walton would visit." The engagement ring, returned to its jeweler's box, sat in her dresser drawer like a silent accusation. Sometimes late at night, when the weight of loneliness became too heavy to bear, she would take it out and let the diamond catch the moonlight, remembering the joy on Bulmer's face when he had placed it on her finger. Penelope tried to help in her own way, arranging dates with eligible men and organizing girls' nights out. But each attempted distraction only served to highlight what Judy had lost. Every restaurant reminded her of quiet dinners with Bulmer. Every park held memories of their walks together. The city had become a maze of emotional landmines, each corner potentially hiding another reminder of their shattered love. "You did the right thing," Penelope would insist, watching her friend push food around her plate during their weekly lunches. "He was living a double life. You deserve better." But in the depths of night, when doubt crept in like a thief, Judy found herself questioning everything. The memory of Ballmer's tenderness with her students, his genuine joy in simple moments together, clashed violently with the scene she had witnessed at the restaurant. How could a man capable of such pure love also be capable of such deep betrayal? The children from their first meeting at Oakridge Manor wrote to her occasionally, their innocent letters filling her mailbox with bittersweet reminders of where it all began. She responded with cheerful notes about school and their progress, never mentioning the man who had brought them together, never asking about the life that continued at the manor without her. October bled into November, and the holiday season approached with its cruel emphasis on love and family. Judy declined invitations to staff parties and family gatherings, unable to face the pitying looks and careful questions about her broken engagement. She volunteered for every extra duty at school, filling her hours with work to avoid the emptiness of her apartment. Ballmer, too, retreated from social obligations. His absence from charity galas and business functions became notable enough to spark rumors in the financial press. Speculation about his state of mind affected stock prices, but he remained indifferent to the whispers that followed him through corporate corridors. One stormy evening, reminiscent of the night they met, Ballmer found himself driving past her school. The building was dark except for one classroom window where a familiar silhouette moved among the desks. His hands tightened on the steering wheel, every fiber of his being urging him to stop, to run inside, to explain everything. Instead, he drove on, her threat echoing in his mind like a funeral bell. The separation took its toll in subtle ways. Judy's colleagues noticed she no longer wore bright colors, as if her wardrobe had adapted to match her emotional state. Ballmer's business decisions became more aggressive, almost reckless, leading his board of directors to question his judgment privately. Mrs. Harrison found ways to preserve small traces of Judy's presence at Oakridge Manor. The tea blend she had favored remained stocked in the kitchen. Her favorite flowers still appeared in the sitting room vases. These small details were like keeping vigil for something not quite dead, maintaining hope against hope that somehow, someday, understanding would triumph over misunderstanding. During these months of silence, both Ballmer and Judy lived in parallel worlds of pain, separated by a gulf of assumptions and unspoken truths. Their love, rather than dying, seemed to grow, stronger in its enforced silence, like a plant reaching desperately toward light it cannot see. December arrived with its promise of renewal, but for them, time seemed frozen in that moment of heartbreak. The Christmas decorations that appeared throughout the city felt like mockery, each twinkling light a reminder of the joy they had lost. Ballmer doubled his donations to children's charities, as if trying to buy absolution for a sin he hadn't committed. Judy spent her evenings grading papers in her empty classroom, the sound of carol singers floating up from the street below like ghosts of happiness past. Their mutual friends, those few who had known them as a couple, watched helplessly as two people so clearly meant for each other remained trapped in a tragedy of misunderstanding. Some tried to intervene, to suggest that perhaps things weren't as they seemed, but Judy's threat of self-harm kept even the most well-meaning attempts at reconciliation at bay. The new year approached, bringing with it the weight of resolutions and fresh starts. But for Ballmer and Judy, time had lost its healing power. Each day was simply another exercise in endurance, another test of their ability to breathe through the pain of separation. Yet even in this darkness, fate was preparing its own resolution. The truth, so long hidden behind walls of silence and assumption, was gathering strength for its revelation. In the quietest moments of their separate suffering, neither could have known that their story was far from over, that sometimes the deepest darkness comes just before the dawn of understanding. As January drew to a close, the stage was being set for a reunion that would either heal their wounds or deepen them beyond repair. The next chapter of their story waited in the wings, ready to prove that sometimes love must be broken before it can be rebuilt stronger than before. Chapter 8. The Mount Tamalpais Revelation. Mount Tamalpais School's grand auditorium buzzed with anticipation on a crisp February morning. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, creating halos around the assembled guests. Parents, teachers, and community leaders gathered for the annual Excellence in Education ceremony. Judy sat near the back, her presence required as a faculty member, but her heart aching to be anywhere else. 6 months of separation had done little to dull the pain of her lost love. The school's principal, Dr. Margaret Leora, approached the podium with an air of barely contained excitement. "Ladies and gentlemen," her voice carried clearly through the state-of-the-art sound system, "today we have a very special guest, a man whose generosity has transformed countless lives, though few know the full extent of his contributions to our community." Judy's attention, which had been drifting, suddenly snapped back to the present. Something in Dr. Leora's tone, a note of reverence and personal knowledge, sent a familiar thrill of anticipation down her spine. "Please welcome Mr. Balmer Walton." The world seemed to stop spinning on its axis. Judy's hands gripped the edges of her chair as Balmer walked onto the stage, his presence commanding yet somehow different from what she remembered. 6 months had left their mark, new lines around his eyes, a slight grey at his temples that hadn't been there before. He moved with the same confidence she remembered, but there was a weight to his shoulders that spoke of burdens carried alone. "Thank you, Dr. Leora," he began, his voice sending waves of memory crashing through Judy's defenses. "I'm not here today to talk about business success or financial achievements. I'm here to share a truth that has been hidden for far too long." The audience leaned forward collectively, drawn in by the unexpected vulnerability in the billionaire's tone. Judy found herself holding her breath, unable to look away from the man she had both loved and feared to love. "Many people think they know me," Balmer continued, his eyes scanning the audience but not yet finding her. "They see the successful businessman, the quick temper, the arrogant billionaire. Some even believe I'm capable of living a double life, of betraying those I claim to love." His voice caught slightly on the last words, and Judy felt tears beginning to gather in her eyes. She wanted to run, to escape, before her carefully constructed walls crumbled completely, but something held her in place. "But today, after 20 years of silence, I want to share the real truth." He paused, seeming to gather strength for what came next. "I run 20 orphanages across California. I run them because I was an orphan myself, abandoned at birth at a time when the system was even more broken than it is today." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Judy's world tilted sideways as memories began to realign themselves. The woman and children at the restaurant, his ease with her students, his passionate interest in education. "I was lucky," Balmer continued, emotion making his voice rough. "A janitor at the orphanage noticed I had a head for numbers. He spent his own money buying me second-hand math books, teaching me after his shift ended. That man, Thomas Harrison, became the father I never had. His wife, Margaret, yes, the same Mrs. Harrison who still works for me today, became my mother in every way that mattered." Tears were flowing freely down Judy's face now, each word he spoke hammering at the foundations of her misunderstanding. In the audience, she noticed Mrs. Harrison sitting quietly, her own eyes glistening with pride and love. "When success came, I made a promise. No child in my care would ever feel the abandonment I had known. Every orphanage I build is a promise kept to that lonely boy I once was, and to the man who taught me that family isn't about blood, it's about love. The auditorium was absolutely silent now, hanging on every word. Bulmer's composure began to crack, real emotion bleeding through his usually controlled exterior. These children you see visiting my home, sharing meals with me, calling me at all hours, they're not some secret family. They're my family in the truest sense of the word. Every one of them carries the same wound I carried, the same questions about why they weren't wanted, why they weren't enough. His voice broke completely on the last word, and he had to pause to regain control. When he continued, his words carried the weight of 20 years of carefully guarded pain. I keep this work private not out of shame, but out of respect for their privacy. These children deserve to be known for who they are, not as Bulmer Walton's orphans. They deserve the chance to build their own identities, their own futures. Understanding crashed over Judy in waves. The mysterious phone calls, the private wing at Oak Ridge Manor, the unexpected cancellations. Everything took on new meaning in the light of this revelation. The woman some of you may have seen me with at restaurants or events. That's Catherine Mills, my chief administrator for the orphanage program. The children with us are usually new arrivals, kids we're trying to help adjust to their new reality. We have dinner together because sometimes the only way to show a scared child that they're safe is to treat them like family. Bulmer's eyes finally found Judy in the audience, and the raw pain she saw there made her heart constrict. I've learned that secrets, even those kept for the right reasons, can destroy the most precious things in life. Trust, once broken, is harder to rebuild than any business empire. The implications of his words hit her with physical force. He had known she was there that night at the restaurant. He had understood why she disappeared, why she wrote that devastating letter, and still, bound by her threat of self-harm, he had kept his silence. These children have taught me more about love than all my years in business ever could. They've shown me that real strength isn't in keeping walls up, but in having the courage to let them down. They've taught me that sometimes the greatest act of love is telling the truth, even when it might be too late. Tears streamed down Judy's face as memories of their time together replayed with new clarity. His natural rapport with her students, his passionate discussions about education reform, the way children gravitated to him wherever they went. How had she not seen it? Today, Mount Tamalpais School becomes home to the Walton Scholarship Foundation. Every year, children from our orphanages who show academic promise will receive full scholarships here, because every child deserves what Thomas Harrison gave me, a chance to be more than their circumstances. The applause that erupted was thunderous, but Bulmer wasn't finished. His eyes found Judy's again, and in them she saw all the words he hadn't been able to say these past 6 months. Love, like family, comes in many forms. Sometimes it arrives in a storm, teaching us that the most precious things can be born from chaos. Sometimes it leaves in a storm of misunderstanding, teaching us that the truth, hidden too long, becomes indistinguishable from lies. His voice softened, becoming almost intimate despite the hundreds of people between them. But the greatest tragedy isn't in losing love. It's in letting fear and assumptions destroy something beautiful before the truth has a chance to be heard. The emotion in the auditorium was palpable as Bulmer stepped back from the podium. Dr. Leora returned to announce the details of the scholarship program, but Judy barely heard her. Her world had shifted on its axis, revealing a truth both beautiful and devastating in its simplicity. For 6 months, she had lived with the certainty of betrayal, while Bulmer had honored her threat of self-harm by keeping his silence. The man she had accused of living a double life had actually been living his truest life all along, a life dedicated to ensuring no child felt the abandonment he had known. As the ceremony concluded and people began to move towards the reception area, Judy remained frozen in her seat. The weight of her misjudgment, the pain she had caused through her hasty assumptions, felt overwhelming. The truth she had finally learned was both a balm and a blade, healing her heart, even as it cut her with the knowledge of how wrongly she had judged the man she loved. She watched as children from various orphanages surrounded Balmer after his speech, their love for him evident in every gesture and smile. Catherine Mills stood nearby, her professional demeanor softened by obvious pride in her boss's revelation. And there was Mrs. Harrison, the woman who had become his mother, watching over it all with tears of joy streaming down her face. The scene before her was not the evidence of betrayal she had feared, but rather proof of a love so pure and profound it had transformed not just one life, but hundreds. As Judy sat there, witness to the truth finally revealed, she began to understand that sometimes the greatest act of love is not in keeping secrets to protect others, but in having the courage to reveal them, even when the cost might be too high to bear. Chapter 9. Truth and Tears. The reception hall of Mount Tamalpais School hummed with conversation as guests processed the revelations of Balmer Walton's speech. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, catching dust motes that danced like golden tears in the afternoon light. Judy stood frozen in a corner, her heart thundering against her ribs as she watched Balmer across the room, surrounded by well-wishers and children from his orphanages. Every fiber of her being yearned to run to him, to throw herself into his arms and beg forgiveness for her catastrophic misunderstanding. But the memory of their last 6 months of silence held her back. How do you apologize for destroying something precious based on assumptions? How do you ask forgiveness for threatening your own life as emotional blackmail? Catherine Mills, the woman Judy had mistaken for a secret wife, stood nearby coordinating the children with practiced ease. Now that Judy looked with clear eyes, she could see the professional distance in Catherine's interactions with Balmer, the respectful way she deferred to his decisions while maintaining her own authority with the children. How had jealousy blinded her so completely? Mrs. Harrison appeared at Judy's elbow, offering a cup of tea that smelled exactly like the blend she used to serve during those precious mornings at Oak Ridge Manor. "He missed you terribly, you know," the older woman said softly, her eyes full of understanding rather than accusation. "Every day, I watched him check his phone, hoping somehow you'd reach out despite your letter." Tears spilled down Judy's cheeks as she accepted the tea with trembling hands. "I was so stupid," she whispered, "so quick to believe the worst instead of trusting the man I claimed to love." "Love makes fools of us all at times," Mrs. Harrison replied gently. "The question is whether we're brave enough to admit our foolishness and try to make things right." Across the room, Balmer knelt to speak with Lucy, who had somehow gotten permission to attend the ceremony. The sight of him with the young student who had once been so afraid of storms made Judy's heart constrict. He was the same man who had sheltered her class that stormy night, the same soul who had shown such patience and kindness. How had she ever doubted him? Taking a deep breath, Judy handed her untouched tea back to Mrs. Harrison and began making her way across the room. Each step felt like walking through deep water, the weight of her guilt and regret threatening to pull her under. Conversations hushed as she passed, people recognizing her as the teacher who had once been engaged to Balmer Walton, wondering, perhaps, if they were witnessing the beginning of a reconciliation or another heartbreak. Balmer sensed her approach before she reached him. He straightened slowly, his face becoming a mask of careful neutrality that hurt more than any anger could have. Lucy, notices the tension, quickly scampered away to join her classmates. "Balmer," Judy's voice cracked on his name. I'm so sorry." The words felt hideously inadequate, like trying to drain an ocean with a teaspoon. His eyes, which had once looked at her with such love, now held a guarded pain that cut straight to her soul. "Are you?" His voice was quiet, but carried an edge she had never heard before. "Sorry for believing I could betray you. Sorry for not asking me the truth? Or sorry for threatening to end your life if I tried to explain?" Each question hit like a physical blow. Around them, people began to discreetly move away, giving them space while pretending not to listen. Judy felt tears streaming down her face, but made no move to wipe them away. They were a small penance for the pain she had caused. "All of it," she whispered. "I'm sorry for every moment of doubt, for every assumption, for every day of silence that hurt you. I'm sorry I didn't trust the man who showed me nothing but love and honesty from the moment we met." Balmer's jaw clenched, emotion flickering behind his careful mask. "Do you know what it did to me? Reading that letter, knowing that if I tried to explain, tried to tell you about the children who depend on me, you might—" His voice broke, unable to complete the thought. "I know," Judy's voice was barely audible. "I know I hurt you in the worst possible way. I let jealousy and insecurity poison everything beautiful between us. I let other people's whispers matter more than the truth I should have seen in your eyes." She took a shaky breath before continuing. "The woman I saw you with that night at the restaurant, Catherine, she's amazing with the children. I watched her today, saw how she helps you give them the family they deserve. How could I have been so blind?" "Relationships are built on trust," Balmer replied, his voice carrying the weight of 6 months of unspoken pain. "If you couldn't trust me enough to ask questions, to give me a chance to explain, what did we really have?" The question hung between them like a sword. Judy felt its edge cutting through the last of her defenses, laying bare the truth of her own insecurities. "We had love," she said softly, "real, profound love that I damaged through my own fears and doubts. I let my past experiences with betrayal color everything about us, and in doing so, I became the very thing I feared, someone who betrays trust." Something flickered in Balmer's eyes at her words. A recognition, perhaps, of the painful honesty in her admission. Around them the reception continued, but they stood in their own bubble of raw emotion and painful truth. "You know what hurts the most?" he asked, his voice softening slightly. "Not the accusation of betrayal, not even the 6 months of silence. What hurts most is that you believed I could be the kind of man who would play with people's hearts that way. After everything we shared, after seeing me with your students, with the children at Oak Ridge Manor, you still thought I could be capable of such cruelty." His words struck at the heart of her shame. Judy remembered countless moments that should have shown her the truth. His gentle patience with struggling students, his genuine joy in simple moments of connection, his deep commitment to making a difference in children's lives. "I was wrong," she said, straightening her shoulders to meet his gaze directly. "Wrong in ways I can never fully make right. But Balmer, the man I fell in love with, the man who sheltered my students in a storm, who remembered every child's name, who made me believe in the power of second chances, that man is standing right here, proving through his work with these orphanages that love can heal even the deepest wounds." Tears gleamed in Balmer's eyes now, though he held them back through sheer force of will. "And what about your wounds, Judy? The ones that made you so quick to believe the worst of me? Who helped you heal those?" The question caught her off guard with its insight. In all her guilt and regret, she hadn't considered that her reaction might have stemmed from her own unhealed past. "No one," she whispered. "I never let anyone close enough to try. Until you. And when I thought I saw history repeating itself, I let fear override everything I knew about your heart." A small commotion near the refreshment table drew their attention momentarily. One of the younger orphans had knocked over a punch bowl, and Catherine was already there, handling the situation with calm efficiency. Judy watched as Bulmer's eyes tracked the scene, noting the instinctive way he moved slightly toward the child before forcing himself to stay put. "Your love for these children," Judy said softly, "it's the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. I see now what I should have seen that night. A man dedicated to giving others the family he never had, the chances he had to fight so hard to earn." "They're my redemption," Bulmer admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "Every smile, every small victory, every moment of trust they give me, it helps heal that abandoned little boy I used to be. That's why your letter hurt so much. You took the purest part of my life and twisted it into something ugly." The truth of his words stabbed deep into Judy's heart. She had let her own demons destroy something beautiful, something that could have added to the healing work he was already doing. "I can't undo what I did," she said finally. "I can't take back the pain I caused or the trust I broke. All I can do is stand here now, seeing you clearly for perhaps the first time, and ask if there's any chance that trust can be rebuilt." Bulmer was quiet for a long moment, his eyes moving from her face to the children scattered throughout the reception hall, then back to her. When he spoke, his voice held both pain and weariness. "Trust isn't a luxury in love, Judy. It's the foundation. You could have asked me the truth, but instead, you chose to believe the worst. Shame on you." With those words, he turned and walked away, leaving Judy standing alone in a room full of people. The truth of his rebuke hung in the air around her, each word a testament to how thoroughly she had destroyed something precious through her own fears and assumptions. As she watched him move through the crowd, stopping to comfort the child who had spilled the punch, Judy realized that some mistakes can't be undone with a simple apology. Some betrayals cut too deep, some wounds take more than words to heal. The sunlight that had seemed so bright earlier now felt harsh and accusing. In its unforgiving clarity, Judy saw the full magnitude of what she had lost through her own actions. The man she loved stood across the room, his heart evident in every interaction with the children he protected, while she stood alone with the knowledge that she had mistaken his greatest virtue for a fatal flaw. The truth had finally been revealed, but instead of bringing healing, it had only served to illuminate the depth of her mistake. As the reception continued around her, Judy remained rooted to the spot where Bulmer had left her, understanding finally that sometimes the hardest truths to face are the ones that show us our own capability for causing pain. Chapter 10. The Weight of Consequences. The days following the Mount Tamalpais school ceremony unfolded like pages from a tragedy neither Bulmer nor Judy had imagined themselves starring in. The truth, now laid bare, seemed to have created an even wider chasm between them. Each carried their own burden of pain. Bulmer, the weight of 6 months of enforced silence; Judy, the crushing guilt of her catastrophic misunderstanding. Judy's attempts to reach Bulmer became increasingly desperate. She sent letters to his office, each one returned unopened. She tried visiting Oakridge Manor, only to be met with kind but firm refusals from Mrs. Harrison, whose eyes held a mixture of sympathy and disappointment that cut deeper than outright rejection. "He needs time," Mrs. Harrison would say gently, standing in the doorway that had once welcomed Judy like a second home. "Some wounds can't be healed with just words." The media, catching wind of the rift between the billionaire and his former fiancée, began spinning their own narratives. Headlines speculated about the reason for their separation, some coming uncomfortably close to the truth. Judy's stomach churned each time she saw another article painting Bulmer as either villain or victim, knowing she alone bore responsibility for their pain. At school, her students sensed the change in their teacher. Lucy, particularly perceptive for her age, lingered after class one day. Miss Hendricks, she said softly, why don't you and Mr. Walton read to us any more? Did you stop loving the children like you stopped loving each other? The innocent question brought tears to Judy's eyes. No, sweetheart, she managed to reply. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes that hurt the people they love, but that doesn't mean they stop loving. Balmer, meanwhile, threw himself into his work with an intensity that alarmed even his closest advisors. Board meetings became exercises in endurance as he drove his executives to exhaustion, demanding perfection in every detail. His legendary temper, which Judy's presence had once softened, returned with a vengeance that sent subordinates scurrying for cover. Only at the orphanages did glimpses of his true self emerge. During his visits, which became more frequent as if seeking solace in the pure acceptance of children, he would sometimes catch himself turning to share a moment with someone who wasn't there. The phantom of Judy's presence haunted these spaces where they had once imagined building a future together. Catherine Mills, who had unwittingly played a role in their tragedy, tried to bridge the gap. She loves you, she told Balmer one evening, after a particularly difficult day at one of the homes. Anyone can see that, and you still love her. Love isn't always enough, he replied, his voice heavy with resignation. Trust, once broken, is like a shattered mirror. You can try to piece it back together, but you'll always see the cracks. The situation came to a head when Penelope, consumed by guilt over her role in fostering Judy's suspicions, attempted to meet with Balmer. She managed to corner him outside his office building, her lawyer's training giving her the confidence to confront him directly. You need to hear her out, Penelope insisted, blocking his path to his car. I was the one who fed her doubts that night at the restaurant. I was the one who convinced her you were living a double life. If you want to blame someone, blame me. Balmer's response was cold enough to freeze the San Francisco summer air. You gave voice to her doubts, but they were her doubts to begin with. She chose to believe the worst of me rather than ask for the truth. That choice was hers alone. The encounter made headlines in the local papers, adding fuel to the already raging fire of public speculation. Judy's inbox filled with messages from well-meaning friends and colleagues, each offering advice she couldn't follow or comfort she didn't deserve. One evening, as she sat alone in her classroom grading papers long after her colleagues had gone home, Judy received an unexpected visitor. Thomas Harrison, the former janitor who had become Balmer's surrogate father, stood in her doorway, his aged face kind but serious. He was just a boy when I found him, Thomas began without preamble, settling into one of the student desks with the ease of someone used to making himself comfortable in unlikely places. Brilliant with numbers, but so afraid of letting anyone close. It took years before he would trust me enough to accept help. Judy set down her red pen, understanding that this was a story she needed to hear. When success came, it could have hardened him completely. Instead, he chose to become the person he needed when he was young. Every orphanage he built was a promise kept to that lonely boy who thought he wasn't worth loving. Tears streamed down Judy's face as Thomas continued. Your letter, your threat to end your life if he tried to explain. It took him right back to that place of helplessness. You didn't just break his trust. You broke his heart in the one way he was most vulnerable to being hurt. I didn't know, Judy whispered, though the words felt hideously inadequate. No, you didn't, Thomas agreed. But you didn't try to know either. You saw what you expected to see, just like all those people who only see the tough businessman, the quick temper, the arrogance. You, who he thought had seen his true self, proved to be just like everyone else. The truth of his words hit her with physical force. She had done worse than misunderstand Balmer. She had confirmed his deepest fears about letting people close enough to hurt him. Days turned into weeks, and still, the weight of consequences pressed down on both of them. Judy began volunteering at local children's shelters, not as an attempt to win Ballmer back, but as a way to understand the world that had shaped him. Each child's story helped her comprehend the magnitude of what he had built and the depth of her failure to trust in his goodness. Ballmer watched her efforts from afar, receiving reports from his network of social workers and administrators. Each mention of her name reopened wounds that refused to heal, yet he couldn't bring himself to ask them to stop updating him about her activities. The situation reached a breaking point when one of Ballmer's board members suggested using the scandal to their advantage. "The public loves a redemption story," the man argued during a private meeting. "We could spin this into positive publicity for the company." Ballmer's response was immediate and fierce. He fired the board member on the spot, but the incident forced him to confront the public nature of their private pain. The next day, his lawyers filed a defamation suit against Judy. The lawsuit wasn't about money. They all knew that. It was about principle, about putting their story on record in a way that would end the speculation and rumors once and for all. But more than that, it was about forcing them both to face the consequences of their actions in the most public way possible. When Judy received the legal documents, she didn't call her lawyer. Instead, she sat at her desk and began writing a response that would become part of the court record. "I, Judy Hendricks, freely admit to causing grievous harm to Ballmer Walton through my unfounded accusations and threats. I destroyed something precious through my own insecurity and fear. If this court requires payment for that destruction, I offer everything I have, knowing it can never be enough to compensate for the trust I broke and the pain I caused." Her written statement circulated through legal channels, eventually reaching Ballmer's desk. He read it late one night in his study at Oak Ridge Manor, the same room where he had once proposed to her. The raw honesty of her words struck something deep within him, but the walls around his heart had grown too thick to easily breach. As spring edged towards summer, their story seemed headed for its final chapter in a courtroom. Neither could have known that fate had one more twist in store, one more chance for love to prove stronger than pain, for trust to rise from its own ashes. The weight of consequences had brought them to this point, but it would be the weight of truth, pure, unvarnished truth, that would determine their future. As the court date approached, both Ballmer and Judy found themselves facing the ultimate consequence of their choices, the possibility that sometimes love, no matter how real or deep, might not be enough to bridge the chasms we create through our own fears and doubts. Chapter 11. Hearts in Balance. The San Francisco Superior Court building rose before Judy like a temple of judgment, its granite facade catching the early morning light. Today marked the beginning of the legal proceedings that would put a formal end to her relationship with Ballmer Walton. The defamation suit, though technically about reputation and damages, felt more like a public trial of her heart's greatest failure. She had dressed carefully that morning, choosing a simple navy suit that spoke of respect rather than defense. Her hands trembled slightly as she climbed the courthouse steps, remembering how those same hands had once penned the letter that had set this tragedy in motion. Inside, the marble halls echoed with footsteps and whispered conversations. Reporters gathered in clusters, their presence a reminder that this private pain would play out under public scrutiny. Judy caught fragments of their speculation as she passed. Billionaire Walton's former fiancé. Sources say she threatened suicide. The orphanage's revelation changed everything. Her lawyer, Patricia Leora, met her outside courtroom 12. "Remember," Patricia said quietly, "we can still mount a defense. Your emotional state at the time, the circumstances of misunderstanding, any good judge would consider these mitigating factors." Judy shook her head. "I'm not here to defend myself. I'm here to accept the consequences of my actions." The courtroom doors opened, releasing a wave of climate-controlled air that carried the scent of leather and wood polish. Judy entered, her heels clicking against the polished floor in a rhythm that matched her racing heart. The gallery was already filling with spectators, journalists, legal observers, and faces she recognized from Balmer's corporate world. Then she saw him, seated at the plaintiff's table with his legal team. Balmer's profile was sharp against the wood-paneled walls, his expression set in lines of careful neutrality. He didn't turn when she entered, but she saw his shoulders tense slightly, as if he could feel her presence. Mrs. Harrison sat in the front row directly behind him, her silver hair elegantly coiffed, her eyes meeting Judy's with a complex mixture of emotions. Beside her sat Thomas Harrison, his weathered hand covering his wife's in a gesture of support. Catherine Mills occupied the seat on Mrs. Harrison's other side, and scattered throughout the gallery were staff members from various orphanages, all there to support the man who had given them a mission beyond themselves. As Judy took her seat at the defense table, she noticed something that made her heart catch. In the back row, trying to be inconspicuous, sat Lucy and her mother. The child's presence was like a knife to Judy's heart, a reminder of innocent questions asked and trust betrayed. The court clerk's voice rang out, "All rise! The Superior Court of California, County of San Francisco is now in session, the Honorable Judge Sarah Montgomery presiding." Judge Montgomery entered, her robes flowing behind her as she took her place at the bench. Her reputation for insight and fairness was well known in legal circles, but today she would be asked to pass judgment not on points of law, but on matters of the heart. The proceedings began with opening statements. Balmer's lawyer, a distinguished man named James Wilson, rose to address the court. "Your Honor, this case is about trust betrayed and reputation damaged. Mr. Walton's private work with orphaned children, work kept confidential to protect vulnerable young lives, was twisted into something sinister through Ms. Hendricks's unfounded accusations. Her threats of self-harm then prevented Mr. Walton from defending himself against these accusations, causing immeasurable damage to both his personal and professional standing." Judy watched Balmer during this speech, noting how his jaw clenched at certain words. She could read the tension in his shoulders, recognizing it as the same tension she had once soothed away during stressful business dealings. When it was Patricia's turn to speak, Judy touched her arm gently and stood instead. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I would like to speak for myself." A murmur ran through the gallery. Judge Montgomery studied her for a moment before nodding. "Proceed, Miss Hendricks." Judy moved to the podium, her legs somehow steady despite her racing heart. Looking out at the assembled faces, she drew a deep breath and began to speak from her heart, rather than any prepared statement. "Your Honor, I stand before this court not to defend my actions, but to acknowledge them fully. 6 months ago, I saw something I didn't understand and, instead of asking for clarification from the man I claimed to love, I jumped to the worst possible conclusion. I wrote a letter containing accusations and threats that I can never take back." She paused, gathering strength to continue. "I later learned that what I had seen was Balmer Walton being exactly who he has always been. A man of profound compassion who has dedicated his life to ensuring no child feels the abandonment he once knew. My failure to trust in that goodness, my choice to believe the worst instead of asking for the truth, caused pain that no legal judgment can fully address." Tears began to roll down her cheeks, but she made no move to wipe them away. "I destroyed something beautiful through my own fears and insecurities. I took the purest part of this man's life, his dedication to orphaned children, and twisted it into something ugly. When the truth was finally revealed, I understood the full magnitude of my mistake. But by then, the damage was done." The courtroom was absolutely silent now, every eye fixed on her as she continued. "I stand before you today not seeking mercy or understanding, but asking this court to acknowledge the full weight of my actions. Whatever judgment you deem appropriate, I will accept, knowing that no punishment can equal the pain I caused by failing to trust the man who had never given me reason to doubt him. From the corner of her eye, she saw Balmer shift slightly in his chair, his carefully maintained composure cracking just enough to show the emotion beneath. The man I wronged built an empire of compassion alongside his business empire. While others saw only his success or his temper, I had the privilege of seeing his heart. And in my moment of doubt, I betrayed not just his trust, but the very essence of who he is. Judy turned slightly, finally allowing herself to look directly at Balmer. I don't ask for forgiveness. I haven't earned that right. I ask only that this court understand that the man I accused of betrayal is, in fact, the most loyal and trustworthy person I have ever known. The failure was entirely mine. She returned to her seat, legs finally giving way as she sank into her chair. The gallery remained silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air like summer thunder. Judge Montgomery's voice cut through the silence. "Mr. Wilson, does your client wish to make a statement?" Balmer stood slowly, his movement drawing all eyes in the courtroom. For a moment he simply stood there, his tall frame casting a long shadow in the morning light that streamed through the high windows. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying the weight of months of unspoken pain. "I came to this court seeking justice for a betrayal of trust. But sitting here listening to Ms. Hendricks speak her truth, I find myself questioning what justice really means in matters of the heart." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "The children in my care have taught me that sometimes the greatest act of courage is admitting when we're wrong. They've shown me that trust, once broken, can be rebuilt. Not by pretending the break never happened, but by acknowledging it fully and choosing to try again." The gallery held its collective breath as Balmer continued, his voice softening. "I filed this suit because I needed the truth to be part of public record. Not to punish, but to ensure that the work we do with orphan children couldn't be twisted or misunderstood again. Perhaps in doing so, I was trying to protect my heart as much as their privacy." Judge Montgomery leaned forward slightly. "Are you suggesting a change in your pursuit of this case, Mr. Walton?" The question hung in the air as Balmer turned to look at Judy for the first time since entering the courtroom. Their eyes met across the space between them, and in that moment, all the pain and love and possibility of their story seemed to crystallize into a single point of truth. The answer he would give, the decision he would make, would determine not just the outcome of this legal proceeding, but the future of two hearts that had once beaten as one. As the courtroom waited in breathless anticipation, the weight of everything that had brought them to this moment pressed down like a physical force, demanding resolution. Chapter 12. Love's victory time seemed to stand still in courtroom 12 as Balmer Walton faced Judge Montgomery, the weight of his next words holding the power to either heal or forever break two hearts. The morning sunlight streaming through the high windows cast long shadows across the floor, like bars of a cage that had held them both prisoner to misunderstanding and pain. "Your Honor," Balmer's voice carried clearly through the hushed courtroom, "I need to stop these proceedings." A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Judy's heart stopped beating for a moment as Balmer turned away from the judge to face her directly. Gone was the careful mask of neutrality he had worn. Throughout the morning, in its place was an expression of such raw emotion that tears sprang to her eyes. "This was a lesson," he said, his voice thick with feeling, "a lesson about how betrayal feels, about the pain of having someone you love believe the worst of you without giving you a chance to explain." He took a step toward her. "But I realize now that I've been teaching this lesson at the cost of my own heart." Judge Montgomery leaned forward, her usual judicial sternness softening as she witnessed the scene unfolding before her. "Mr. Walton, are you withdrawing your suit?" "Yes, Your Honor." Balmer never took his eyes off Judy as he continued. "Because I finally understand something my children have been trying to teach me all along. Sometimes love means choosing forgiveness over justice." The silence in the courtroom was absolute as Balmer closed the distance between them. Judy stood on trembling legs, tears flowing freely down her face. In the gallery, Mrs. Harrison clutched her husband's hand, while Catherine Mills smiled through her own tears. "6 months ago," Balmer said softly, now standing directly before Judy, "you wrote me a letter that broke my heart. You threatened to end your life if I tried to explain, and in doing so, you took away my voice, my chance to show you the truth. For 6 months, I've carried that pain, letting it build walls around my heart." He reached out, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. "But watching you stand here today, hearing you take full responsibility for your actions without trying to defend them, it reminded me of something crucial. The woman I fell in love with, the woman who saw past my reputation to my heart, who understood my love for children without needing explanations. She's still here." "Balmer," Judy whispered, her voice breaking on his name. "I don't deserve—" "This isn't about deserving," he interrupted gently. "It's about choosing. And I choose to believe that love, real love, can survive even our worst mistakes if we're brave enough to learn from them." From the bench, Judge Montgomery cleared her throat. "Mr. Walton, Ms. Hendricks, while this court appreciates the power of reconciliation, we do need to handle this formally. Do you wish to make a statement for the record?" Balmer turned to face the judge, but kept one hand lightly touching Judy's arm, as if afraid she might disappear. "Your Honor, I move to dismiss all charges. The only judgment I seek is the opportunity to rebuild what fear and misunderstanding tried to destroy." "Ms. Hendricks?" the judge prompted. Judy stepped forward, her voice stronger now despite her tears. "Your Honor, I stand by every word of my admission. I was wrong, terribly wrong. But if Balmer is willing to give me a chance to earn back his trust, I will spend the rest of my life proving worthy of that gift." Judge Montgomery smiled, a rare sight in her courtroom. "Then, by the power vested in me by the state of California, I dismiss this case with prejudice." She paused, then added more softly, "Sometimes the greatest justice is found not in punishment, but in the courage to try again." The bang of her gavel was drowned out by spontaneous applause from the gallery. Lucy burst from her seat in the back, running down the aisle to throw her arms around both Balmer and Judy. "Does this mean you'll read to us again?" she asked hopefully, causing laughter to mingle with the tears in the courtroom. Balmer lifted the child into his arms, looking at Judy over Lucy's head. "What do you think? Should we give story time another try?" "Yes," Judy whispered, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Yes to everything. The scene that followed would be talked about in legal circles for years to come. The distinguished billionaire and the schoolteacher, surrounded by children from his orphanages who had snuck into the back of the courtroom, sharing their first kiss in 6 months, while a Supreme Court judge smiled benevolently from her bench. Mrs. Harrison approached them as they finally broke apart, her eyes shining. "The manor has missed you both," she said simply, pulling them into a fierce embrace. 1 week later, Balmer and Judy stood together on the terrace at Oakridge Manor where their story had begun. The summer evening was perfect, the air filled with the laughter of children playing on the lawn below. Students from Judy's class mingled with children from the orphanages, all of them caught up in some elaborate game involving water balloons and much squealing. "They're already family," Judy observed, watching a boy from one of the homes patiently teaching Lucy how to aim a water balloon. "They don't see differences or barriers. They just see people to love." Balmer wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. "We could learn a lot from them," he agreed. "They understand something adults often forget, that trust isn't about never making mistakes. It's about being brave enough to be honest about them when we do." Judy turned in his arms to face him. "I'm still learning that bravery," she admitted. "Every day I'm learning to trust not just you, but myself, to believe that I deserve this second chance." "We both are," he said softly. "The children teach me something new every day about forgiveness, about letting go of past hurts to make room for future joys." Their conversation was interrupted by Catherine calling from below. "Mr. Walton, Ms. Hendricks, the children want to know if you'll join their water balloon fight." They looked at each other, matching smiles spreading across their faces. "What do you say?" Balmer asked, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Ready to get a little wet? With you?" Judy laughed, already pulling him toward the stairs. "I'm ready for anything." As they joined the chaos on the lawn, their laughter mingling with the children's shrieks of delight, both knew that this was more than just a game. It was a celebration of love's victory over fear, of trust reborn from the ashes of misunderstanding, of the family they were building together, not through blood or obligation, but through choice and love. Later that night, as they sat in their favorite spot by the fireplace, surrounded by sleepy children who had refused to go to bed, Balmer pulled something from his pocket. It was Judy's original engagement ring. "I never could bring myself to return it," he admitted, holding it up so it caught the firelight. "Even during our darkest moments, some part of me held on to hope." Judy looked at the ring, then at the man holding it, and finally at the children scattered around them, some from her class, some from his homes, all now part of their extended family. "Hope is a powerful thing," she said softly. "So is love," Balmer replied, slipping the ring back onto her finger where it belonged. "When it's real, it can survive anything, even our own mistakes." As they sealed this second chance with a kiss, a sleepy voice piped up from the pile of children. "Does this mean we get two sets of parents now?" The question made them both laugh, joy bubbling up like a spring too long trapped underground. Looking around at the faces of these children, some bearing the scars of abandonment, others simply seeking love and understanding, they saw not the ending of their story, but the beginning of a new chapter. Their love, tested by storms of misunderstanding and strengthened by the courage to try again, had become something greater than just two hearts joining. It had become a beacon of hope, showing that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones we choose to build, and the strongest love is the one that learns to forgive. The fire crackled softly, casting warm light over their unconventional family gathering. Outside, the stars twinkled above Oak Ridge Manor, witnessing this moment of perfect contentment. Their story, born in a storm and tested by fire, had emerged stronger for its trials. In the end, love had indeed won its greatest victory, not by being perfect, but by being brave enough to try again. Subscribe if liked.